Michael, today we are recapping.
Yeah.
It's good because I think we put a lot of work in that series, and I think it turned out really well.
I think so too. What did we end up with? 12 episodes, 13 episodes,
13.
That's a lot. It's I forget if it was a good split of like 6 and 6 or 6 and 7. But it is a lot of information, and we said this kind of at the halfway point when we did the summary for the first half is, all of this information is useless if you don't use it or do something with it. And so the whole back half was kind of helping to, I guess, set you up and give you the mental and psychological and motivational tools to actually put those things into practice.
Yep.
Because that's where it gets difficult,
Yeah.
It's like one of the first things that we said, I think maybe episode 1, weight loss is simple on paper, but very complicated in practice.
Absolutely.
And so I think for the most part, I think we did a great job covering all of the relevant stuff. There's probably some stuff that we didn't cover a lot of. And I mean, there are reasons for that, but I think for the intents and purposes of getting people started and on their journey, I think we got as much as we could fit in.
Yeah. Well, I think last time, the last episode I made with Savannah, what we focused on was we realized a lot of the Instagram and the short-term reels, they focus on 2%, meaning plastics, like red dye, like all these things, right?
Oh, yeah.
It affects your health maybe 2%. We understand it probably makes a difference somewhere, but we want to focus on the 90%. So even all the weight loss things we talk about in this series, it's like, if you do these things, you'll get pretty close. You're going to get 80, 90%. If you get that right, then you have the extra credit time to figure out the other 2-3% things. But we want to make sure we get the majority of the part right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, I don't really have a good answer as to why we do that. I think it's because we don't want things to be as simple as they kind of are.
Right.
And so it can't just be, this thing. It's got to be all these other little things. And so we focus on those because it can't be that, like in the context of like nutrition, right? We use this saying all the time that, everybody's an expert in nutrition because everybody eats. I'm like, no, no.
Yeah.
But everybody feels like because they eat all the time, they've got that figured out. It can't be that. I know what I'm doing there. It's got to be, this coloring or this artificial sweetener or, this macronutrient or, whatever. And it could be at some level, some of those things or all of those things,
right,
based on the individual. But, those things are not going to contribute to the bulk of your efforts.
Right.
It's going to be that thing that you don't want it to be is going to be what it is.
Yeah. So I figured, today, as we're wrapping things up and just kind of summarizing things, I thought about a couple phrases. So we'll just toss them up and we'll talk about them.
Okay.
The first one, and we'll start with this because this is probably the crux of all of it, is calories matter. So we'll go ahead and put that out there because a lot of social media people now are saying calories don't count. It's only hormones, or like you have this disease, whether it's thyroid or PCOS, and then sure, it might make things harder, but they'll say things like, well, that's the only reason why, and calories don't matter. If you learn anything from our podcast, especially in the first 6 episodes, calories do matter in the grand scheme of weight loss.
Yeah, I was actually listening to a podcast yesterday while I was washing my wife's car. By the way, don't wash a car when it's that cold outside.
It's cold outside, man. It's freezing out there.
It was terrible. Terrible experience. Car looks great.
Yeah.
But anyway, the guy that was talking, he was focusing in on insulin and talking about, this goes back to, I think we mentioned the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity and weight loss. And the point or the claim that he was making was that, if you keep your insulin levels low, it's impossible to gain fat. And because insulin, causes, energy, to move into fat cells. And, that if you just remove the insulin, then that is impossible. Well, that's not true, number one. But number two, it also, he said, like, he almost got there, but then didn't go there. He said something along the lines of like, the insulin opens the cells so that if you're eating too much food or you're getting too much energy, it all gets stored away. And I'm like, well, there it is right there. You just said it without saying it directly. You know, the insulin may play a role in the process of storing excess energy, but the excess energy can't be stored if there's no excess energy.
Right.
So if you're in a calorie deficit, it doesn't really matter, you know, as far as weight gain and weight loss, where your insulin levels are necessarily to a great extent. If you're in a calorie deficit, you're not going to be storing that fat.
Correct.
And I'm like, why are you stopping there? And then I realize he's got a book that he's trying to sell that's all about the insulin and all that. And I'm like,
yeah. See, that's the thing. Like, I mean, everybody's out against pharma, and sure, pharma has some practices, but the big thing against them is like, well, pharma's trying to make money, and I guarantee you right now, those influencers are also trying to make money. Right?
I mean, it's all the incentives. We've talked about that before.
Yeah, exactly. And so, right, it's like what we said before. Like sometimes what we'll realize is there is overlap, meaning foods that stimulate lots of insulin are also high in sugar and all these processed stuff. So a lot of times when people do things like keto, where they cut out all the carbohydrates, they're thinking they're cutting out insulin, but a lot of times if you look, they're actually cutting out a lot of calories. Is what they're cutting out.
Yeah, and that's the thing is you can, like, let's talk about, you know, if your goal is to reduce your blood sugar, you know, obviously you're going to control your carbohydrates. You may not cut them out 100%, but let's say that you focus on, you know, cakes, donuts, sugary drinks, and stuff like that, you know. Well, cakes and donuts probably have more calories from fat than they do carbohydrates. Sugary drinks are just straight sugar, but you know, cutting out those few things that we understand are like highly processed, you know, probably not the greatest things to be eating. You know, yeah, you attribute it to the carbohydrates, but there's so many calories in there that can contribute to your weight loss, and weight loss by itself can lower blood sugar levels.
Right.
Like, you know, if your goal is to correct your blood pressure, right? You know, the recommendation we make there is lower your sodium intake, you know, because salt and water are best friends. When your blood gets too much salt, it pulls fluids in and increases the pressure. That causes blood pressure, right? So when you remove salt, one of the things that you remove are processed foods. What happens when you remove processed foods? You start eating more whole foods. The processed foods have fewer, more calories, and they're easier to digest, so you don't burn as much energy eating them. We talked about thermic effect of food. So you're going to eat more whole foods, which is going to make you eat less foods, and healthier foods, and you're going to lose weight, but even though that wasn't really your target. And so it's really easy to draw this conclusion between, well, you know, why don't we do that? Well, it's the salt intake that's making people fat. You know, no, it's the calories. The salt and the processing plays a role in it, but it's, you know, calories matter.
So exactly. So don't be fooled by the people on the internet who are trying to sell you something and say something that sounds really new, but really it's just playing off the exact same concepts that's been around for like hundreds of years, right?
Yeah, and I think the most frustrating thing about it for me, you know, and I guess there are two main frustrations. One is obviously the incentive structure. Like, you kind of have to check that. I mean, it's the same thing that we look at in research, you know, when we're looking at scientific research studies. They have a section in those studies for conflicts of interest because, you know, if the sugar industry funds research looking into the dangers of sugar, and wouldn't you know, the study finds no dangers to sugar. You would question the validity of that study because look who's paying for it. Now that doesn't mean that it's nefarious, right? If they're doing it from a, you know, responsible stance of, well, we just want to make sure that the things that we're doing are good, you know, and sometimes that happens where, you know, like the milk industry will pay for studies to be done on milk. And, you know, it turns out milk is probably one of the best hydrating liquids that you can drink. And so that's just the thing. But, you know, just because there is a potential conflict of interest doesn't mean there is one, but there definitely could be. And so when you see a person on a podcast, you know, giving you all of this information, but they're putting that information in a book that they want you to buy, they have a financial incentive to make it sound like they're telling you the truth. The other thing that's frustrating is they'll often sandwich their narrative between truths, right? So this particular podcast I was listening to yesterday, in the lead up to his, there was a shift where all of this in the beginning was factual information about how insulin dependence becomes a thing and what contributes to it, and then he went on this like soapbox about insulin for a little while and completely, eliminated other confounding variables and talked about what happens in a petri dish. And I'm like, well, I'm not a petri dish, so you can't compare those two things. And then after that, he followed it up with some more factual stuff or information. But it's like right in the middle of those two things.
Right.
If you didn't know better, you would assume that he's just spitting facts the whole time and not crafting a narrative in the middle, which is what he was doing.
Yeah.
And that was just really frustrating because the guy that sent that to me was genuinely curious about, what is this, what's going on here? Is there, is this true? And I value your opinion.
Yeah.
And I told him it's, he's sandwiching his narrative in the middle. And he's like, well, why would he do that? I said, because he's trying to sell you a book.
Yep.
I was like, and there's no laws against doing that, on a podcast.
Absolutely.
So he can do that. You just got to be careful.
Yep, exactly. The second thing I thought was really good in our podcast was this matter of exercise.
Okay.
Right. So exercise from the standpoint of calorie burn, not much. But exercise from the standpoint of building muscle, which increases your basal metabolic rate, is a lot.
Yeah.
And plus, that's not even counting all the other things that exercise does as far as balance and quality of life and strength and, aging and all that stuff. But that was really good to know that when patients are like, I haven't changed my diet. I just started going to the gym 3 times a week. I haven't seen anything in 4 weeks. Most of the time you won't because it's not enough.
Yeah. And, I thought about this after we did our exercise episode because there was a study that was published and I saw it on X. It was the linear dose response of weight loss with exercise. And so the claim they were, what the studies showed was that people that exercised more saw more weight loss. And so it's like the conclusion they were drawing is like exercise leads to weight loss. But the point that we were making, we're not saying that exercise by itself doesn't burn enough calories to cause weight loss.
Correct.
We work with real people and real patients.
Right.
Studies work with people in very controlled situations and controlled environments, and they have to. And so when you're reading the results of a study, they're under like very controlled and optimal conditions. And so in a perfect world, we could exercise just incessantly and just burn off all the food we eat. In the real world, people don't have the time to sit there and exercise 3 hours a day to make that big of a difference to lead to substantial weight loss.
Correct.
And for that to be the case, their diet has to be really dialed in.
Absolutely.
And most people are just not there. And so when we are talking about exercise in the, realm of sustainable weight loss, it needs to be a tool, like what do they call it when you put 2 treatment modes together? The adjunct. Yeah. It has to be together with a good diet to see the best results. Like, sure, you could spend all day running on a treadmill and see some weight loss, but like you're not going to be doing much else.
Correct.
So we're trying to approach it from a balanced perspective for a real person in the real world that faces real life challenges that make it difficult to do those things. Yeah. So that's the approach we took. And, but yeah, I think that that's kind of the best way to approach it.
Yeah. And a lot of times what I tell people when I look at studies like that is, again, who is the person that could actually exercise 3 hours a day?
Not me.
Yeah. It's not the person with 2 kids or not the guy who's working on the line at Nissan. It's probably somebody who's usually already pretty well off, who's working from home, right? So he has different resources, like The Rock. He has different resources than we have. And so, again, like you said, we are working with real people. And so a lot of times when you look at these little studies that get thrown out there, I mean, it's the reason why eggs are bad for a while and then eggs are good for a while and then it's bad for a while. Like, there's too many variables in there. And if you just tweak one variable, you get a different result. So all that being said, we are big proponents of exercise. I love exercise. I think as far as lifespan and health span, it does so much for your body. But as far as just I'm just going to eat, 2,000 calories at a restaurant and then just go to burn it off. If you try to calculate that, the amount of hours you have to run to burn 2,000, you wouldn't have time to do anything else.
You have to run like if the average calorie burn of a mile is 100 calories a mile, you'd have to run what 20 miles.
20 miles, yeah.
And what's the average mile time? Like 15 minutes if you're walking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Even if you could, you don't have the time to do it. Yeah.
There's just so much time in a day. When are you going to sleep?
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
And it's just not, you can't do that. You can't. Yeah.
Yeah. Which again, I think moving on. So, man, I don't want to sleep. Just important. You got to sleep. Please sleep.
Please sleep.
Yeah. I think I had a patient the other day was like, she wasn't seeing the results. She was working out at Burn Boot Camp, like crack of the dawn, early morning, very, faithful there all the time. But she sleeps 4 hours a night. And we were like, and she's like, why am I not advancing? I was like, because your body has no time to heal. Right. And so plus cravings change, stress the next day is different. So we're going to plug that in there. You got to sleep. Please prioritize sleep. If anything, you heard in that first couple of messages, that sleep episode is really good. Yeah.
And interestingly, we did get into, we got some information and contact information for a sleep scientist to come on and actually spend time talking specifically about sleep. So we need to get on that.
For sure. Got to get her on here.
We've been trying to wrap up this thing and move on to new topics. And I think that'll be a good opportunity to do that. But yeah, sleep is kind of one of those, underrated or underappreciated parts of it. When we talk about what are those things that people don't think about that contribute to weight loss, one of them is proper hydration. Another one is adequate sleep. Like we're not doing those two things on a consistent enough basis.
For sure. The episode on environmental design I thought was awesome because again, I mean, we know willpower is limited. And I think that's another one that we talked about. But if we're only limited on willpower or how much willpower you have in a day to use, then we've got to figure out how to make it easier to use less willpower. And changing the environment is a big one.
Yeah. And, that is, we did our last episode on atomic habits and we talked about how environmental design plays into the habit process of, the first thing is cue. So things that you see or smell or experience that trigger a craving that you then behave on and then, get the reward at the end of it, right? Or the consequence.
Right.
And so cue is the first thing in the process of habit. So that's where you should start. Environmental design. If you have things in your environment that are going to trigger cravings for things that you do not want, as far as, your habits, things that you're working on, you just need to figure out how to get them out of there or move yourself to a different environment. So that environmental design just makes it so much easier. You can't eat it if it's not there. You will eat if it is, putting the fruit bowl on the counter, putting the snacks somewhere hidden, putting your treadmill in a room other than your living room, right? Because we talked about context of the room mattering. If you go into the living room and your habits are sit down, pull out your phone, turn on the TV and veg out for 2 hours, putting a treadmill in that room, you're not going to want to get on it because your brain is going to say, oh, this is my veg room. It's not for exercise. It's for, I don't even know what the word. I want to come up with some witty little word for the opposite of exercise without being like laziness. But yeah, like put your treadmill in another room and dedicate that space to just exercise, and you're more likely to get in there and actually do it. So it matters a whole lot. And we gotta do things like that to make it easy, because if we're put on the spot, we are not great at making good decisions in the moment when we're put on the spot. We will typically always default to whatever bad habits that we already have or, bad tendencies. We're always going to default back to that. So.
Yeah. Which again, I think that was really revealing that, okay, we are all not great with willpower on certain things, right? Like some of us might love exercise, so that's not our thing, but our food is a big thing. And some maybe want to have a problem with food. They just don't want to move or sleep or whatever. And so realizing that we are limited on what we can do and realizing that we can adjust our environment to make that easier is a big one.
Yeah. And the willpower thing, it's, you can get better at it.
Right.
As you practice and continue to implement willpower and practice and continue to do it, you get better at it. But still, it is a finite resource at the end of the day. And so, you know, you may be able to last a few days, but eventually, if you are just consistently bombarded by the things in your environment that trigger those cravings, you're eventually going to give into it.
Right. Because,
you know, when you're tired, when you're stressed out, which I don't even know if we did a full episode on stress, but we definitely could have. But, you know, when you're stressed out, you don't have the ability to tap into the parts of the brain that control your logical processing.
Right.
And so you always default back to lizard brain and just eat whatever is in front of you.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's not helpful. So that's why controlling stress is probably, you know, one of those things that I would throw in there with water and sleep.
Yeah.
Controlling stress as far as what can we do to make, weight loss easier, but simply because we don't make great decisions when we're stressed.
Yep. That's 100%. I think everybody realizes that most of the time when they're making bad decisions, because they're stressed out. At the end of the day, they're out of willpower already, and the brain is just like, just do whatever, just survive. And even with kids, you know, raising children, you realize that's when they attack you and ask you. They don't want their dinner; they want something in the pantry. And by the end of the day, you're like, you know what? Fine, just get something. Whereas, again, if you're in a third world country and you don't have a pantry, there is no reason to ask me about what's in the pantry because I don't have one. And that's why they don't do with picky eating there, because if it's not there, they can't eat it, right? So, anyway, we're not trying to become a third world country, but
no. And it's crazy because we're dealing with that right now at home where, you know, we're trying to eat a plate of spaghetti, but my daughter's like, well, I want chocolate. Like, well, you can't have chocolate. You got to eat your spaghetti. Yeah, but I really like chocolate. I'm like, I bet you do. Everybody likes chocolate, but you got to eat your dinner first. Yeah. Well, I want to eat chocolate. Well, it's my chocolate now. I'm taking it and putting it in there. That's right. You can't see it because as long as she can see it, that's where she's going to be.
Yeah.
When you take it out and put it in another room so she can't see it. Remove the cue from the environment, and then she eats her spaghetti.
Very true. Yeah, and it's so funny. Those little kids are so smart. They know which parent to push and who's weaker today. They're like kind of push around. It's like, oh, somebody's running out of pay. I'm gonna go.
My wife and I were literally sitting up last night having a conversation of the best way to deal with our daughter as far as like how do we outsmart her with this? Because you're exactly right. They are way smarter than people will give them credit for. They're like. It's crazy.
Oh yeah.
And I feel dumb sometimes because I'm like, what are we doing wrong here? What are we missing? How do we keep getting outsmarted by this 3-year-old?
That's right.
And when you have to sit there and have 2 adults have a conversation about how to outsmart a 3-year-old.
Correct.
Like that doesn't sound great, but it's the truth.
Yes.
It is what it is.
It is wild that we are fighting over a kid who can't use the potty well yet. And we're just sitting here like, you know, like, why are we arguing with this person? But you're exactly right. They are, it's like, and if they smell blood in the water, like a shark, they go crazy and they'll get you. So not we don't have kids. Yeah. They're wonderful, but man, they are a challenge.
Kids are the best though. Like kids. Yeah. And I mean, I guess we're getting a little off topic here, but I could seriously have an entire episode on kids.
Yeah.
Because kids are both the hardest and most challenging, but also the most important thing that you will ever do.
Yeah.
And you know, it's challenging, but it is entirely worth it. And I have become a much better version of myself since having kids.
Yes.
And you know, this is a complaint about society for the most part. But this idea that, you know, happiness is found, you know, when you're on your own and doing your own thing and you don't have to answer. No, man, happiness, the more responsibility I took on when I had kids, the happier I was.
Absolutely.
And it's kind of paradoxical if you don't know, but it's true. Like kids make you better.
Yeah. I mean, just look. I mean, we have one of the lowest birth rates right now ever, and also one of the highest levels of anxiety ever. You know, and again, I mean, I understand kids are expensive. They do cost money, but man, people used to raise 13 kids on a farm somehow in a 1-bedroom cabin, right? So, and across the world, they're still doing it. So,
I'm glad we don't have to do that anymore.
Yes,
we don't have to. I guess you could if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't use those excuses.
Yeah.
Anyway, we are off topic. Maybe
Let's get back on topic.
Yeah. Maybe one of the last things I wanted to talk about was this idea of habit stacking. I thought that was a really, really good one because, again, we're talking about making new habits. I think when people finished listening, they realized that we are just essentially the accumulation of all our habits, especially when it comes to health, right? So our exercise routine, our nutrition routine. And so building new habits is hard. We have to rewire things. Some things that have been there, some habits that we had for decades, where you try to rewire them. One of the ways to make it easier is to stack it with a habit that you're already doing.
Yeah, it's things that you're already doing. If you can add something in with that and just use that as the cue for the next habit, they just kind of roll into each other. And I keep using the example of, doing exercise during your coffee, because I have a person who did that for a long time while they were in like a transitional period where their gym was not set up and all that kind of stuff. So I use that example a lot just because it's, in my mind. But it doesn't have to be just that. It could be, if you... have a hard time checking social media, or you want to check social media, but it's taking time from other things. You can tell yourself, okay, I'm only going to check social media when I'm brushing my teeth.
Yeah.
And so you're brushing your teeth, which you really want to check your social media. Go brush your teeth. Look at it while you're brushing your teeth, because what are you going to do with that other hand? Nothing.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody that brushes their teeth with two hands.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So like you can do that. I mean, that's probably a bad example, but that would probably be more along the lines of temptation bundling, which is kind of the flip side of the coin of habit stacking, where, you take the thing that you don't want to do. And if that's brushing your teeth, you stack it on top of the thing you do want to do, which is look at social media. And so you can't look at social media until you brush your teeth.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, same kind of concept, different application. Temptation bundling, habit stacking, it works both ways. So just put things together and, it makes your life a little more efficient because you're getting things done when you otherwise wouldn't be getting those things done. And it just makes it easier because you're working off of pre-existing cues. But yeah.
Well, and again, maybe the last thing, one more thing. It's just, we'll wrap it up with this. I mean, you have to find your why. I think that's a big one. Like, why are you doing this? So again, we talked about habits, we talk about exercise, we talk about nutrition, we talk about weight loss and getting healthy and all these things, and they're all great. But in our clinic, we realize there's a lot of people that are in horrible health, horrendous health. They don't want to do anything about it. It doesn't matter if we make these visits, our clinic visits, free. It doesn't matter if we offer them dietitians and all the resources we can give you, and people. Even the idea like, hey, you're going to go blind in 5 years if we don't fix this. There's no willingness. And I think the big one is, and I kind of to tie this all together, it's like, why do you want to do this? And if people don't have an idea of why they're doing it, then it's easy to either stop it or give up or do it for 3 months and stop. But once you figure out why you're doing something, it really kind of sets the foundation for habits and health.
Yeah, it's purpose. And I feel like, that's something that society these days is kind of lacking a lot of. There's a reason that, and I think this, and you can look at the data and it kind of supports it, but there's a reason that rates of depression and anxiety and everything are high, and people are unfulfilled in their, their work and their lives, and people don't have purpose.
Yeah.
That isn't saying that people don't have things that they should be working towards. They do. It's just hard to see that when you're so caught up in how busy life is. But I'm going to circle back onto my kids. My kids give me purpose. It redefined me as a man, as a human being, that everything that I do is driven by my desire to be the best dad to those kids, to provide as much as I can for those kids. I mean, my wife too, but, when it was just her and I, it was just easy, to not really care too much. Cause you guys, we didn't have a whole lot of responsibility. We had extra income and it was just whatever. It was, it wasn't that bad. But then when you have kids, it's like, you have to, prioritize things. And so for me, you know, all of the things that I do and my efforts at being good at what I do in my job, keeping myself physically healthy, you know, making sure that my nutrition is good, my exercise, you know, coming to the doctor and get my labs checked and staying on top of all that stuff, trying to get as much sleep, you know, doing my Bible study every day. Like all of those things are all with the intent of just being better because my kids are my purpose.
Yep.
I want to be, you know, as good as I can so that I can raise the best kids that I can.
Yep.
Because, you know, yeah, they have my last name, but at the end of the day, when I'm gone, you know, maybe they won't, but the values that I can give to them and the things that I can teach to them, that's what they're going to carry on.
Absolutely.
So I need to be as good as I can be so that they can carry that on and be as good as they can be.
Yep.
That's important. So I'm not saying that kids have to be your purpose, but something that deep, that driving, that, you know, this is why I'm doing this. I want to be healthy for this reason. I need, and it has to be very strong to drive. And if you can find that, nothing's going to stop you. Except yourself.
Absolutely.
Like find a why, find a purpose, find your reason for why you want to do this and hold on to that. And sometimes it's not easy to do that, but, you know, I encourage you all to just explore it as much as possible until you find it and then just run with it.
Yeah. Man, perfect. We will wrap it there. Michael, any final thoughts on anything that you got?
No. If you have questions, if you think of any topics that we didn't cover, well, you know, a lot or in great detail and you want to know more, let us know. I will gladly expand on things or come up with new interesting things, you know, and I'm sure that in future episodes, kind of outside of the, you know, structured series, we'll probably touch on some of these topics again or kind of update as new science comes out or new research is done. Because that's the thing is, well, I'll say truth, you know, but it's kind of like science is this is how it works. It's, you know, the science is true in the period in which it exists.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that 5 years from now, what we know today is still going to be true.
Correct.
It's dynamic. So it's going to shift. And so as things shift, we kind of have to shift what we say. And like you said earlier, you know, eggs are good, eggs are bad, eggs are good, eggs are bad. Right now, eggs are good. Like,
That's right.
That's right. So, you know, when new things come out and we get a little bit more knowledgeable, we'll put out episodes that kind of update that and tell you where we are.
Sounds good. Well, thanks, Michael.
My pleasure as always. And we'll see you next time.
Yep.